People who have caused or witnessed an accidental death. What was the experience like and what happened afterwards? Story 1. I had someone cross the street right in front of my car without looking where he was going. I slammed on my brakes and skidded towards him. This got his attention, so he started to run out of my way, but unfortunately he ran into the next lane, and a car moving along at about 55 miles per hour hit him. He was sent across the street and landed on the curb that was at least 40 feet away. I stopped my car and ran over to him, but it was already apparent he wasn't alive. The man who hit him crashed his car and ran back to where a small group of people were standing over the old man. He was hysterical, saying over and over again that he didn't see him. I tried to calm him down, telling him there was nothing he could do. I almost hit him too. It wasn't his fault. I walked him over to the curb away from the dead man and sat with him until the police arrived. That was the first time in my life I had seen anyone die, much less such a violent death. I wasn't sad, though I felt bad for the old man and the young man that hit him. I remember looking at the body and wondering where he was going, what was on his mind that he wasn't paying attention crossing the street. It took days before it stopped consuming my every thought. It's been years now and I can still hear the body and metal crunching. As a matter of fact, about a month ago I was watching a movie with my girl and someone got hit by a car. I kind of mumbled to her, "That's not what it sounds like." That stuff stays with you. Story 2. I was driving down the road and everything was fine. My next memory is running down the road and towards a car that was upside down on the side of the road. There was smoke, shouting, and bits of car in the road everywhere. When I arrived at the car, it looked like it was empty, but then I saw the old man laying down in the footwell by the pedals. He must not have been wearing a seatbelt. I just froze and he looked up at me and smiled and some blood came out of his mouth. Someone from another car showed up and said she was a nurse, so I let her do her thing and looked around. There was a lorry in the middle of the road, crossing both lanes, all smashed up. The driver was there, shouting and panicking, saying that he just pulled out in front of me. Why was he on the wrong side of the road? Etc. I kind of snapped at him and said it didn't matter. We needed to call an ambulance and the police. At this point, I overheard the nurse tell her friend that the old man was no longer alive. The weirdest thing was the gap in my memory. When I turned around, my car was right there, totally fine, about a meter or two away from me. From what I was able to determine, the car in front of me drifted over or tried to turn or something and smashed into a lorry literally right in front of me, and my brain just kind of went nope and immediately deleted it from my memory. Absolutely, immediately. Like I said, 1 minute I was in my car, next minute I was running across the road. I knew the brain could block stuff out if it's traumatic. I just didn't expect it to be like that. I still remember the old man's face. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I kind of think he saw how panicked I was and smiled at me to make me feel better. Maybe he was just out of it. Maybe it wasn't a smile at all. I have no idea. Story 3. Budapest, fall 2004. I was studying abroad and on some kind of group field trip that involved public transportation, and getting on a train meant going down multiple super steep multi-floor escalators. A man started running down the escalators. My whole class was on the same escalators too, going down towards the train. But this man rushed past us, and we all watched as he tripped and then fell for what felt like forever. He fell all the way down to the bottom, where we watched as his head literally split open, and we were all still on these stupid escalators, slowly getting closer to this horrible scene. It felt like it all happened in slow motion. It was awful. One guy in our group had some medical training, so he stayed and tried to help. He did not survive. It still makes me sad and also creeped out to think about it more than 10 years later. Story 4. This happened when I was in 4th grade 6 years ago. It was January 27th, 2011, between 2 and 3 p.m. It was elementary school still, and there was still a thing called recess. During that hour-long time, I usually played soccer with the group of kids that played it. About 20 of us total, give or take some. I was playing defender while the ball was downfield, and I had taken up a chat with the goalie. I remember looking around wondering, why is everyone suddenly running to the other side of the field? When I looked over and saw that the goal over there had collapsed. These goals weren't very well designed, basically rectangular prisms with nets behind them, so it didn't take but a little weight to push it down. Me and the goalie rush over there to see that a kid, let's call him Johnny, is pinned underneath it. Johnny isn't moving, and there's a little bruise on the top of his head. All the students that were here, mainly the 20 kids that were playing soccer, lifted the goal up off Johnny. By the time teachers had arrived and we were called off the field and back inside, the nurse arrived outside. We heard an ambulance come about 5 minutes after that. The next day, we were told that Johnny had passed from a severed trachea. I still remember that day and the investigation that went on afterwards to find out what happened. Basically, a formal police investigation was started because it happened on state property. What they found was that Johnny had been walking with his friend, let's call him Andrew, and had been passing by the goal when someone else had been leaning up on the post. The goal tipped over from the weight of that kid and struck Johnny in the head, flinging it backwards and snapping his trachea. The family of the school filed suit against the school district, saying they were responsible for his death. They eventually reached a settlement out of court. Story 5. My best friend and I had just exited Walmart. He lit up a cigarette, so we were kind of standing there on the curb in front of the store before going to the parking lot. A family was walking in the crosswalk area. It was a youngish mom and dad with their kids, and the grandma. The younger generations of the family walked quickly across the crosswalk from the Walmart exit towards the parking lot, but the grandma was going a little slow. There was a huge douchey Jeep, lifted very high and with massive tires. The little old grandma was too short for the military haircutted guy in the lifted Jeep to notice. He was going slowly, but just didn't see her because his monster truck tires on his Jeep were almost as tall as her. He rolled right over her, and he kind of had a look like, "Why is there a speed bump here?" Meanwhile, all of us looked on in complete horror, with quite a few people screaming and gesturing towards him, but it was too late. The confused panic swept through all of us onlookers in slow motion. About 6 guys got under the Jeep and lifted it off of the poor lady. Some Walmart employees in their desperation brought out wet floor signs, probably just the closest thing they could grab to try and make sure nobody drove by, and put them up around her while we waited for the emergency helicopter to arrive. She was laying flat on her back. Her leg and abdomen had borne the full weight of the Jeep's monster tires. I didn't see much blood except for around her shoes. Her gaze was straight up into infinity. Her eyes were wide and glossy. Honestly, I don't remember what her family was doing. All I could do was stand back far enough to not be in the way when the emergency people arrived. She was still partially conscious when they got her onto a stretcher, but I heard she was DOA at the hospital. Story 6. I was at war. I was on a tank in Fallujah in 2005, and we were watching the road. We called it Road Watch. A car pulled over just out of sight, then blew up. He had accidentally triggered his own IED. We went there, and I got off the tank. One guy was all over the place. Bits of him here and there, such small pieces that I wasn't even sure it was a whole person. The other guy was still strapped into his car seat. The top of the car was gone, and it was half on its side, but like on its roof too. Story 7. My friends and I used to play by a creek that was located about a mile or so behind my cousin's house. On this day, we were swinging from one side of the creek to another on this rope swing that we built. The rope was tied to a tree, and we would do this pretty often. It seemed safe enough. I was with my older brother, 2 of my cousins, and a couple of friends. One of my friends went to swing on the rope and he just slipped. He hit his head perfectly on the edge of a large rock in the creek. One of my cousins jumped in to make sure our friend didn't drown, and when he pulled him up, we all saw how much blood was just pouring from his head. My brother told me and one of our cousins to run back to our aunt and uncle's house to go get help. We got help, and my aunt made us stay at the house while she called 911 and the boy's parents. My uncle went to the creek to see the severity of the injury. The rest of the kids came back, and I asked my brother if our friend was okay, and he shook his head no. I knew that he passed, and it was confirmed later that day. It was really tough. My brother took it pretty hard and cried himself to sleep that night. My brother wasn't really a crier, so it hurt to see him that upset. We shared a room, and we slept in the same bed for a little while following the accident. I felt guilty even though I didn't cause the accident. I just couldn't understand why it happened to him. The accident was only 2 days before the new school year started, so we had counselors come in and tell us what to do if we are feeling sad. At the time, I was really angry that the other students were acting like he was their best friend, even if they never spoke to him. I still think about it from time to time. I just feel for his parents now. I couldn't imagine sending my kid out to play and then getting a call like that just hours later. Story 8. It's been 10 years. I'm still messed up. I don't ever talk about it, so maybe this will be okay. I was 19 and living with my boyfriend. I got the flu. I missed a few days of work and finally recovered enough to go back to work. It was a drive-through of a pretty busy fast food joint. The day I went back to work, my dad called me and told me that my tax forms had been mailed to his house. about 45 minutes away, and I plan to go get them after work. A short backstory that will become relevant. I smoked weed pretty often back then, but hadn't smoked in over a week at this point. Because I hadn't smoked while I was sick, I didn't smoke when going to work, and I probably planned to smoke after I got home from my dad's, honestly. I went to my dad's house with no issue, hung out for a few minutes, I felt fine, and left to go home about 4 or 5 o'clock. I stopped at a store and got some cigarettes and a soda and put them in my purse, which I tossed in the back seat. I leave the store and stop at the next red light. While stopped, I take off my seatbelt to reach my purse. The light turns green quicker than I thought, and I put my car in gear and go without my seatbelt. The road I'm on now is not super busy. Maybe 6 to 7 cars in my vision going my direction. 4 lanes with big tree medians and plenty of turn lanes. I was apparently very dehydrated. At the hospital, I had to have potassium because mine was super low, and they think that's why I passed out. From my later research, it also causes muscle cramping and other more severe stuff. I remember fighting the feeling but not being able to think anything besides the thought that this is not good. My car hit a car that was stopped in a turn lane at a red light. It pushed his car out into oncoming traffic because his wheels were turned. My car flipped 2.5 times, landing on the roof. I'll tell this in the order of what I know, so my situation is first. I was trapped in the car, my very long hair was in a ponytail and had gone out the open sunroof and was stuck between the road and the car. I had slid into construction supplies and a piece of steel rebar was through the windshield and through the driver's seat. I was thrown towards the passenger side and my hair was caught out towards that side. People stopped, but I couldn't see them or move my head. A man came to me and saw what was going on and pulled out his pocket knife. He started cutting my hair and a woman came up. I heard her say, "Oh no, what are you doing? I have scissors." They freed me and I lay on the grass, pretty sure my elbow was broken, knee hurting and disoriented. I was pretty much fine. Lots of bruising and gravel embedded in my scalp and a swollen, immovable elbow. The police came to take a blood sample. I was in a neck brace staring at the ceiling and the cop stood at my feet where I couldn't see him. He told me the man was seriously hurt. Broken leg and arm, broken ribs, and a punctured lung. They flew him to a bigger hospital and I couldn't get any more info for a while. Months later, 5 officers in 3 cars showed up at 11:30 p.m. at my dad's house where I was now living. One called our house phone and told me I was being arrested and to come out quietly so I didn't disturb my elderly parents. I was arrested on 11 charges, including basically all DUI charges, which really confused me. Very serious DUI charges involving manslaughter and some possession of weed charges as well. I was granted a $10,000 bond. 10% bail is $1,000, so it would allow me to be on house arrest, which didn't allow me to work. I was in jail for a little over a month when they called me down to booking. I thought it meant my dad had got together enough cash for the bail. I was wrong. The man I hit developed a staph infection at the hospital and died from it. They changed my charge to manslaughter by DUI at this point. The DUI came from the blood test. They found trace metabolites of marijuana in my system. After the blood test results came back, the officer that responded to the wreck filled out a form that was meant to describe my appearance, actions, and quirks, etc. I don't remember talking to this man. I remember laying on the grass until I was out on a stretcher and into an ambulance. The report said that I had red eyes, slurred speech, dry mouth. I dropped things repeatedly and couldn't follow simple commands. I finally made bail and spent a year on house arrest with my dad supporting me. I was able to work at the end for a few months, then finally got my release conditions modified to no house arrest a few days before court. The day I got off house arrest, I went to spend the night at my boyfriend's. The first one dumped me when I was in the hospital after the wreck. This one helped me the whole time I was in jail and on house arrest and is an angel on earth and now my ex. We got a phone call at about 2 a.m. saying that my dad had been taken to the hospital. He'd had a heart attack and died before he got to the hospital. He was 44. I went to court a few days later, and they dropped all the felony charges and gave me 6 months probation for the misdemeanor possession charges. Then I went to court for my violation of probation, different county, and was sentenced to the maximum sentence, 11 months, 29 days, taken from court to jail, heels and all. I'm still pretty messed up over everything. I don't drive. I don't even really leave my house. I finally decided to go back to school because I can get my associate's degree all online through the local community college, and it's a serious struggle when I have to go to the testing center. I even missed my mom's graduation today. She's going to be a teacher because I couldn't deal with that many people. I have severe insomnia, posting this at 3:30 a.m., and depression and severe anxiety. I probably need professional help, but the thought of even calling someone gives me panic attacks. Story 9. Without a doubt, one of the hardest things I've ever been through. I was driving to meet my mom for dinner near her work after class. It was maybe 7 p.m. I typically take the highway when heading out that way, but it was a nice day, so I decided to take the back roads. Along the way, there was a cyclist going along. I noticed him, but he was in the bike lane, which was decently sized. The road was 45 miles per hour, but I had slowed down some as I got closer to the center line to give him some space. Then, once I'm barely a few yards from the guy, he decided to turn directly in front of my car. He didn't make any indication that he would be turning. He didn't so much as look, and there wasn't an intersection in the area. But nonetheless, here he was directly in the path of my car, with barely a few feet separating us. I remember very distinctly everything seeming to slow down. I reflexively slammed onto my brakes as hard as I physically could. I watched in agony as my car screeched towards him. The last thing I remember is his body coming up onto my windshield, the sound of crunching metal and breaking glass, and the blood. Supposedly, I had called the cops hysterically begging for help. When they had arrived, I was on the ground, kneeling next to the man, sobbing as he lay face down on the sidewalk, not moving. He was pronounced DOA. After the accident, I went numb. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was so nauseous and I could barely stand. And in the few moments when I could get myself together, I was forced to have the same conversation over and over with police, lawyers, detectives on what had happened. Always pressing for more details. It was torture and felt never-ending. Months later, after the investigation was concluded, I learned that the cyclist, apart from not wearing a helmet, was a homeless drug addict and was likely high on heroin at the time of the accident. But that didn't come out until months after it had happened. It had been published in the local papers that a cyclist had been killed in a car accident. It was a big story for the town, and I saw it everywhere online. I know I shouldn't have, but I would read the comments people left on the article, all saying things like, "The driver was probably texting. It's so unsafe out there for cyclists," and other things insinuating that it was my fault. I internalized it. Even though I'm absolutely certain I was paying attention, part of me keeps thinking thoughts about how I might have looked down at some point to perhaps adjust the radio and I didn't see his signal, that I missed my opportunity to avoid this, that somehow it is my fault. For a long time after the accident, I was very far from okay. I was dependent on sleeping pills to get any sleep at all, and my appetite dwindled. Every time I got into a car, even if I wasn't driving, I felt panicked. A few years later, and after a lot of intensive therapy, I'm mostly okay. I still have occasional nightmares and can remember the sounds like it just happened. I haven't fully forgiven myself for it, and I'm not sure if I ever will, but it doesn't stop me from living my day-to-day life anymore. Story 10. I used to be an airline pilot for a relatively large regional airline. Because I didn't make much money doing it, I worked as a flight instructor on my days off from the airline. One day, a student of mine and I were up practicing some maneuvers over an area with a lot of trees. As we were finishing up and about to go back to the airport, our engine started acting weird. It was a bit rough and we lost RPM. No big deal, I thought. I figured we were just running the mixture too lean, so I enriched it and had no improvement. I started heading towards a field we passed a couple miles back. It wasn't big, but it was our best shot if things got worse, as the airport was something like 15 miles away. The engine only got worse. I was having trouble maintaining altitude, and I radioed in a mayday call with our position. Eventually, the engine died completely. I tried a restart, but nothing worked. As we were lining up our final approach, we made sure the airplane was secured and all that. Turns out the field was a lot smaller than I thought. We touched down, and it was extremely rough. I had a lot of pressure on the brakes, trying to not lock them. The trees were coming up very fast, and I decided we weren't going to stop. So I tried to get the airplane back on its front wheels and slam on the brakes to make it flip. That way we could at least stop. I thought about it too late, and we smashed straight into a big tree. I can't remember very clearly getting out, but I do remember seeing my student in the front seat slouched over with his head to the side. I tried to yell for him to get out and realized his eyes were open. The local police arrived within minutes of us touching down, and later they said they saw us coming in. They got my student out and took me to a hospital to be looked at and x-rayed because I had bad pain in my neck and back. They pronounced my student dead at the scene. His neck snapped on impact. I didn't have any legal action taken against me or anything. The NTSB and FAA said that I did the right thing in the situation. I just wish I could have gotten the plane flipped over. I feel guilty. His wife blamed me and tried suing me. I have extreme anxiety and don't fly anymore. I wish I could bring myself to do it because I truly loved it. I work construction now because I have always loved building stuff and fixing up the house. I'm 36 years old now and have it on my bucket list to fly one last time. Story 11. When I was a teenager, I lived in a state that had very lax gun laws. I thought guns were cool and my parents thought I was a responsible person, so they bought me a rifle and 2 handguns. I was generally responsible with them. Always carried them properly, unloaded, cleaned them, only shot them in the target range my father built, and always kept them and the ammunition locked up. I had them for 2 years, and these safety precautions were drilled into me by my father to the point where they were ingrained habits that I never skipped. One night, a friend of mine was staying over and we were in my room just hanging out. Sometimes we would take out the revolver and practice twirling it on our fingers, quick drawing, stuff like that. This night, my friend wanted to do that, but instead of taking it out myself, I gave them the key. They took it out and were twirling it around. Then I took my turn. While I was fiddling with it, it went off and hit my friend. I ran out of the room screaming. The police were called and my friend was taken to the hospital where they were pronounced dead. To this day, I have no idea how a live round was in that gun. I was sitting 3 feet away from them when they took it out of the lockbox it was in, so I'm certain they didn't put one in. I always checked the gun when I took it out and before I put it away. My friend didn't check when they took it out that night, and I didn't want to yell at them. We both had just gone shooting the day before, and I remember checking the gun before putting it back because I was explaining to my friend what the safety procedures were, and we went over that when putting it away. The only other person who had a key to the box was my father, and he said that he hadn't touched the guns. After that, I was a complete emotional wreck. I was basically catatonic for months. It was near the end of the school year, and I don't remember taking finals or if I had to make them up or just got excused. It's a total blank. I was prosecuted and represented by the PD. I went to the court dates and sentencing, but I remember exactly 0 of this. I don't remember what the ultimate charge or plea deal was, but I was sentenced to 1,000 hours of community service. I suspect it was a firearm charge of some kind. My parents lost the paperwork in a move a while back and have since passed away. The court doesn't have records going that far back, so I have no way to see what my charge was or what the testimony or evidence consisted of. I wasn't a super popular person to begin with in school, and after this, I was less so. There were some people that became my friends after this, but most of the people I was friends with had shunned me. It was a small town and everyone knew everything about everyone else. The parents of one of my closest friends even forbade me to go over to their house or for them to come over to mine. I thought that was harsh at the time, but now that I'm a parent myself, I totally understand. All of this was over 3 decades ago, and I will always blame myself because I didn't check the gun when my friend got it out. I will never know how this happened, but will carry the guilt for the rest of my life. I haven't spoken of this in over 10 years. Thank you for reading my story. It felt good to put it out there in the world. Story 12. When I was 17, my grandparents were in town and we went to go meet my cousin for breakfast. I drove my grandparents' car as I was familiar with the area. I was at an intersection waiting to turn left. The light turned yellow, and there was one oncoming car quite a bit away, so I began to turn. That's when that oncoming car apparently decided to speed up to make the yellow light, and he slammed right into our car. Both cars ended up on opposite sides of the intersection. My grandpa, in the front passenger seat, and I were okay, aside from some bruises. My grandma, on the other hand, was not. She was the only one in the car not wearing her seatbelt. When the car hit us, it hit her side and right where she was sitting. She was thrown around, but still conscious. Fortunately, it happened about 2 blocks from the hospital, and there was a nurse in her car who saw it happen and got out of her car to help. My grandma ended up with a broken pelvis and bleeding in the brain, among other things. She was taken to the hospital and then was life-flighted to a better-equipped hospital to be rushed into surgery to relieve pressure on the brain. She was intubated and was in the ICU for months. I remember at one point she was awake, but unable to speak because of the tube, and kept signaling for someone to end her suffering. It was awful. My grandparents had been married almost 60 years, and you could see the heartbreak and pain in my grandpa's eyes when she would signal that. She started to get better and was able to begin physical therapy, but then ended up getting a staph infection and died in the hospital within days of contracting it. My mom, grandpa, and everyone else kept trying to tell me that it wasn't my fault. My grandpa and I still have a great relationship. But if I had just waited to turn, none of this would have happened. my grandma would still be alive. It's been almost 15 years and I still feel guilt. I still replay that moment in my head and I still think about everything that led up to that moment. If I had just stood my ground and told my grandma that it wouldn't take as long to get to our destination so we would have left later, it wouldn't have happened. If I just waited until I had a green arrow, if I just checked to see if she was even buckled, maybe even if I hadn't offered to drive. I didn't drive for 4 or 5 months afterwards. For almost a year after it happened, I would refuse to turn left. I would take 3 right turns instead of going left. To this day, I won't turn at that intersection when I'm in that area. Thanks for watching till the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of these ridiculous stories. Love you all, and stay safe out there in that crazy world. Much love. Peace.